Hello. So we already talked about one-point perspective and how to draw objects in it, if you remember our lesson about drawing a room. But let's take a look at this book. You can see the one-point perspective. It's going to be somewhere back here, and all of the lines of the book will converge back at it, including these ones up here. But you won't always see a book in this position. Let's say you walk into your drawing class and the book is turned like this. How would you go on expect on drawing it? You can't do one-point perspective anymore because some horizontal lines aren't perfectly horizontal anymore. That's why we have the trick that we call two-point perspective. So, you remember one-point perspective, we have one point that we call the vanishing point. Well, in two-point perspective, we have two vanishing points. One on the right and one on the left. And all lines will now converge at it. Remember how we talked that in one-point perspective that all horizontal lines like this will be always horizontal, and all vertical lines like this will be vertical? Well, we're only keeping half of that from now on. Only vertical lines stay perfectly vertical in two-point perspective. They are not going to change. But horizontal lines are now also turned, and they are now also in perspective. Let's look. We have 1 point here, and we have 1 point here. And you see how lines 1, 2, 3, and 4 converge at it. And we have a point over here, and we have lines 1, 2, 3, and 4 all converging at it over here. So, when drawing, you will have to now identify these 2 points and create a book based off this single central vertical line. Because remember, vertical lines always stay vertical. Nothing's going to happen to them in neither 1 nor 2 point perspective. So let's say we want to take a look at our book from a different point of view. This time we want to look from the level of the actual book. So as you can see, 2 point perspective still stays the same. And the lines still start to converge from here and here to here and here. And we still have the same vanishing points. Remember, vertical lines still stay vertical. It's just that now we don't see the top edge at all, and we only work with 2 edges. We can still make it work. I really recommend that you play around with a book the same way that I did, and play around with grayscale, and you see how light and shadow hits the book. Because you can't really see it in color, but when you turn it into grayscale, bam, you can see what's the lightest part and what's the darkest part. Now that we saw how perspective, light, and shadow are all affected depending on how we look on any object, in our case it's going to be a book, we can go ahead and start drawing. For this really simple exercise, you're going to need, again, the simplest materials, just a regular sheet of paper, a regular pencil, and maybe some colored pencils. So, the way we start this is the same way we start almost any drawing in perspective, this time in 2 point perspective. We're going to create a horizon line, and on it we're going to mark 2 points that, if you remember, we call the vanishing points. Vanishing points are the places to which all of our non-vertical lines will converge. After you're done with that, create a point somewhere between, I would say right in the middle of your 2 vanishing points, and connect this point to your 2 vanishing points. This is going to be the base of our bottom of the book. After we finish this, we can start to establish the thickness of our book, how thick we want it to be. This is going to change because a big, thick dictionary will not be the same thickness as a small book. You could always look at a bunch of books on your own. Once you established how thick you want your book to be, connect the top of it, the top of your small line that we use to establish the thickness, our front edge, and connect it to the 2 vanishing points again. By this point, you should have approximately 2 triangles coming from this central line. This is going to be our side edges of our book. But our edges aren't triangles, they're rectangles. So in order to make these rectangles, we create 2 vertical lines on the left and right of our center again, in order to understand the boundaries of the length and the width of our book. From then on, remember, vertical lines always stay vertical, and we can now connect the top edges of these vertical lines again to the vanishing points. Remember, all lines in 2 point perspectives go to the vanishing point except for perfectly vertical lines. A quick tip for you. The first time you do this drawing, I highly recommend for you to not only draw lines from the top, but also from the bottom edge of our widths. Just because you have to understand how this rectangle functions, how you see through where these edges go. You will always erase these edges later on when we start coloring, when we start shading, but for now, just understand how this rectangle works in perspective. Once you're done marking it out, once you have your established area where your book's going to be, you can make the edges sharper. You could outline them slightly. Don't go too heavy on the edges though. We don't want any thick, dark lines. Don't forget that we're drawing a book to the maximum realistic ability. So, did you see how on the cover we had some rectangular designs? So let's do that. Let's make this tiny frame. And again, we start from a single point and we draw out the lines in perspective so that they go to one of our vanishing points. Then drag it out to the other vanishing point, and there you have it, these two lines again. From there, you can establish where you want your frame to stop. It's going to be a bit shorter than the distance from the front cover to the first line. Well, because in perspective, the further away it goes, the shorter and smaller it becomes. And again, do the same thing and establish the same borders on the other side. And there we have it, a border on the top of our cover. Another detail that we can make before we start shading. On the side of our book, there are these rifts. So for now, they don't have to be perfectly rounded like we have on the original image. Just map them out and have them stay vertical. Remember, vertical lines in any sort of perspective always stay vertical and they're not going to be affected. So just establish the way you want them to be, the distance you want them to be from each other. Any way you want, but I prefer if you made it from an actual book so that you can practice drawing from nature, from observation. And now we're done with that. We can start doing tonal shading. With tonal shading, remember that you always have to have a light source. My light source is going to be the vanishing point on the right, meaning that we won't see the lightest side, and the rifts of the book, its edge, the one on the left, is going to be the darkest side. And the top and the right side that we see are going to be semi-light. They're going to be halftones. So from this point on, you can start adding this tonal shade, this drift, this gradient. We already practiced it a bunch of times. You have the lightest possible side that we see is the top closest to the right vanishing point, and drag it out darker and darker until we get to the ridges in the rift. This is also a time where you could finally start adding details to your rift. You could start adding the book number, you can start adding some decorative patterns that you have on that rift, and you could also finally establish the depth. Remember that the cover of the book is always slightly thicker. It's going to have a slight distance apart from the actual pages. The pages are, if you see, they're a little bit inside since they're protected by this cover page, by this cover sheet. You have to show this. Remember, if you take a look at the book from this specific position, you are going to see this rift, and you have to depict it. Pages, another thing. You don't have to draw every single page. We don't see every single page. You could just establish it as lines, again, going to the vanishing point. All the lines go to the vanishing point, and you have to reflect that. This is just the beginning in the creation of our drawing, but now we could have finally the time where we can erase a lot of the construction lines, which means we can erase all the lines between the edges of our book and the vanishing point. These are construction lines and we don't need them anymore. Done with that part? Great. You can move on to establishing some of the more of the details. Like on the top cover, we have the name of the book. You don't have to write it out because letters in perspective are a whole different topic that we won't go into today. You could just establish it as a bunch of boxes that we could color in next time. Speaking of color, this is the time where we can finally establish it in our drawing. Take colored pencils, again, don't take any fancy materials, and start coloring your drawing in. Remember to follow the rules of tonal shading. Remember where you have to press down or add more intensity and where you're going to have slightly less intensity. The darkest part, as we already mentioned, is going to be the rifts of the book that we see towards our left. While I'm coloring, I'm going to give you a couple of tips about how you can go ahead with proceeding with your drawing. First of all, never ever go ahead with color once you haven't done tonal shading. You have the time and use it to your advantage. Take a look at how light and shadow works on an actual book. Remember the front of the video, just take a photo on your phone of any book and move it to grayscale. You'll instantly understand where the tonal shading is going to be. Then, once you've established tonal shading on your drawing with regular pencil, you can start coloring. It will become way easier for you. Second of all, your eraser is also a wonderful weapon. You could always use your eraser to establish lighter areas. Like if you feel that you've done an area too dark, just use your eraser to make that area lighter. Or if you want to add a bleak where it's going to be the lightest part reflected, just do a slight dab with your eraser and you're going to instantly add an illusion that there's going to be shape. Another thing, of course, once you have the time, you could draw out every possible letter on the cover of the book, on the rifts. I don't recommend you to, because first of all, it will take way too much time. Second of all, you're risking it to look not realistic, because letters in perspective, as I already said, are a whole different matter that we still didn't get to. But we can always just use simple exercises. Remember, once you look at a still life, it doesn't have to be perfectly visible. You can just, like I'm doing right now, create these boxes of bright yellow color and divide them with brown, and you, once you squint, will get the illusion that we are seeing different letters and that they're just slightly blurry. Another thing about squinting your eyes, this is a really good exercise for you to practice where your tonal shading is. Take a look at an object in light and squint your eyes, and the more you squint down, you will see what's the darker elements and what are some of the lighter elements. This is a really good exercise for you to practice your vision for how you see objects. And once you're looking at objects, you always look at them like an artist. And with these tips, you are going to be on the right way to creating your own masterpiece of a book. Once you're done with coloring, you could always erase any additional lines that we have. Our horizon line, our vanishing points, and here's another thing, we're going to actually re-add our horizon line, and we're going to actually rename it to a table line, because we want to show that the book isn't just flowing around in space, and that it's actually sitting on one surface. We didn't add a cast shadow in this episode, but you can go ahead and add it if you feel really confident. And with this comes the great experimentation of still lifes. Like the Impressionist style, if you don't remember what they are, please visit our videos about them. They drew the same exact objects numerous times during numerous times of the day, numerous weathers, numerous sources of light. And they always got a different result. Just look at the Rouen Cathedral by Claude Monet. And you can do the same thing with still lifes. You can draw the same book, but from different points of view, with different light sources during different times of the day, and you'll always get a beautiful, different masterpiece. I hope to see all of your drawings once you submit them, but before we leave, let's go through what we learned today. Today, we learned about how to create an object using 2-point perspective. We also looked at how to shade this object once it's in 2-point perspective, and we also went through how our point of view affects how we draw an object. I hope to see all of your drawings once you submit them. Good luck. I know you can do this. You've been great so far if you reached here. Goodbye and good luck.